Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Western Washington correspondent, Spencer Pauly, here to talk about the front runner in the Seattle mayoral election, with the election date 2 weeks or so away. Spencer, you talked to Katie Wilson, who said she herself kind of sees some strong parallels between her and the front runner in New York City, Zohran Mamdani. Tell me a little bit about each of these candidates, where these parallels are and where they might differ.
Well, they're both progressives, right? They both want more progressive taxes that target higher income individuals, businesses, and they both are not shy of identifying as a socialist. Mamdani himself is a member of the Democratic Socialist Party. Katie Wilson, however, is not. And that was one of the questions I asked her, because I do see these parallels. So I asked her directly, I said, do you see similarities with Zohran Mamdani? And she says she does see strong parallels between the two. And she emphasized that Seattle mayoral race is nonpartisan. It's a nonpartisan position. So she says it's kind of odd to see these identity politics come into play here, but she doesn't shy away from being called a socialist. She says she can also see herself as a Democrat, but she is not aligned with the Democratic Socialist Party herself. With that being said, there are similarities, like I talked about the progressive tax revenues they're both campaigning on. But also, they both want universal, affordable childcare for working families in Seattle. These are summer programs. But they do stray a little bit. Mamdani himself wants free bus fare. He doesn't want bus fares at all, I should say, for New York City. Whereas Wilson has said she wants free and reduced programs for Seattle for people. So just a little bit different there. But yes, there are similarities for sure between the two. I would say Mamdani himself has gone more in the progressive way than Katie Wilson herself, but she is definitely on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of, you pointed it out there at the end. The difference that I've kind of seen between the two, at least in terms of campaign messages, is that when it comes to offering city services like public transit, the Mamdani campaign is very much about, these services, in their opinion, should be free to residents. Whereas Wilson kind of strays a little bit and says free and affordable. But in terms of both campaigns, that's the message they're pushing, is affordability. And I think that's kind of why we've seen them poll so well in the weeks and months leading up to the election, is that you have a lot of young people who particularly can't afford to buy a home or to live in these major metropolitan cities, and they're looking for some breathing room. But it also begs the question, when you're wanting to push affordability in these free or reduced service costs, it comes back. Who pays for that? I know Mamdani, he himself has advocated for raising the New York City sales tax rate by somewhere upwards of 2%, which might not seem like a lot, but in terms of a single increase, it's pretty substantial. What did Wilson tell you about, some of these progressive taxes in Seattle and other issues like rent control and such?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I asked her because one part of this is you want to tax big businesses, sales home to Amazon, Google, Meta. There are offices here that are targeted to the Jumpstart payroll tax, which Wilson was an advocate for before her mayoral race. And she was pretty straightforward with me, saying she understands that Amazon has the power to move employees to Bellevue. And what she wants to do is have them sit at the table with them and find out incentives to keep Amazon here. So it's not just a direct tax these big businesses, but find a way to keep that relationship intact with these businesses that foot a huge part of the bill here. We're looking at Seattle's current progressive taxes. So I think she's not shy to say that there needs to be some kind of middle ground here between the city and big businesses. So that's one of the conversations we had. But the comparisons are there between New York City and Seattle when it comes to the main issue residents are having is affordability. New York City is drastically expensive, and so is Seattle, just East and West Coast issues here. And I think that's what the platform is running on, is how to make it affordable for the working class individuals. And that comes with, in their mind, targeting other kinds of taxes. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Now, I asked Wilson, I said, how is this? We're seeing this progressive wave here. She's the front runner. She's leading the incumbent mayor, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell. And you're seeing Mamdani lead by over 10 digits, I believe. And she said this comes in the midst of the Trump administration. He was elected. And I think a lot of Democrats look at the current Democratic Party and see it as just representing the status quo, not moving the needle. And so that's where you're seeing this more drastic, progressive, platform being more popular with its residents. And I think that's what we're seeing here in Seattle. And I think that's what you're seeing in New York City.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how the party has responded to the 2024 election and Trump taking his second term. I mean, with some representatives, you hear them say, look, the Democrat Party really failed in the last election, and we need to regroup and kind of maybe take a more centrist viewpoint moving forward. And then you have other groups like Mamdani and Wilson, where they're really leaning on the progressive movement and pushing issues of affordability. But I think it really does come back to, how much will this cost and how are they going to pay for that? And I've heard criticisms from Mayor Harrell himself mention that and saying, look, Wilson doesn't have experience managing this many thousands of city employees, a multi-billion-dollar budget. She doesn't have that experience that him and other candidates might have. I mean, did she speak on that experience from you to you? I know that she has formed these pretty substantial grassroots coalitions, but how does she see that playing into managing such a big budget?
She touched on it a bit, and she basically described herself as an outsider with the insider expertise. I mean, she was the co-founder of the Transit Riders Union, which advocates for progressive transit policies, but has also pushed for minimum wage in Tukwila and Burien, which are now the highest in the United States. And that was led by her, really, and her union. So she acknowledges she doesn't have experience as in an elected position, but believes that her outside expertise will help. And that's another comparison to Mamdani, who, while he's just an assemblyman, he hasn't really ran a position like a mayor or even like a city council position, which is interesting to see from the city of New York City itself, the largest city in the United States. So that's another comparison there, I think. And another thing I thinking about, Tim, is they both have similar styles in running their campaign. I mean, a lot of social media posts, it seems like they're really utilizing social media well. And that's what Wilson's doing. Her social media page is just full of just eye-catching videos, I guess is the best way to say that. I think you're seeing that with Mamdani's as well. And I think that's another similarity we're seeing, is how social media can really influence a campaign's trajectory going into the general election here.
Seattle and in New York City, another major factor in voters' decisions, other than affordability, is public safety. I know the city of Seattle has made somewhat strides in recent months in terms of taking care of some crime downtown. But can you kind of speak a little bit as to where the two align or differ in terms of approaching public safety and how to mitigate crime?
It's pretty similar. Both have had comments during the 2020 George Floyd protest that they have kind of backed off on since then. But Mamdani has shifted his platform on public safety to say he wants to retain the current staffing levels at NYPD and form an entirely new department that would basically help with, let's say, behavioral health needs on site. And that's his platform. And Katie Wilson, to her credit, she has changed it to saying she wants to continue the hiring process for Seattle Police Department, get it to adequate staffing levels, but has said she wants to continue to improve the Harrell administration's enforced care department, which basically does that. They have behavioral health professionals come on scene, and they are assisted by a police officer, but they have the expertise, I think, to maybe help these people who are having a mental health crisis on the streets. And that's just this new progressive way of handling these issues that we're seeing in big cities, where I think you're seeing a more prominent homelessness issue, but also public drug use. And that's, I think, the way these cities are going to handle it in the future. Now, this, like I just said, this is something that was administered by the Harrell administration. So whether or not it's Wilson or Bruce Harrell who is reelected, I think you will continue to see that care department more fledged out in the future.
Yeah, interesting to see her kind of leaning on Harrell's initiative in her own approach to public safety. But that is something that I've heard a lot of support for in recent months and years, is these kind of co-responder programs where you have behavioral health experts responding to certain incidents with a police officer, kind of the double-edged sword approach. But I think, as we're seeing, those statements in 2020 that Wilson and a lot of other political candidates across the country made in supporting the defunding of police, it is kind of a sore spot that's kind of sticking with them in this election, and definitely will be interesting to see how it plays out in the results, though. It looks like Wilson and Mamdani both have a sizable lead over the incumbents, especially in New York, with Mayor Eric Adams recently dropping out of the election there. But something we'll continue to keep our eyes on as you cover it in Seattle, Spencer, and our other reporters cover it on the East Coast. But appreciate you writing the story. A once notorious rapist out of the Spokane area that was very active in the 70s and 80s. It was recently released and landed in the western half of the state, kind of is jumping between communities with the latest move, putting him only a few hundred feet away from an elementary school in Federal Way. Carly, why don't you tell me about this story and kind of what led up to him landing right next to the school?
Yeah, we're talking about the notorious Spokane South Hill rapist Kevin Coe. He was, as you mentioned, released after being civilly committed following his initial prison term from those rapes back in the 70s and 80s. For folks that are maybe not familiar with the story or, lived in this area. I mean, I've lived in the state my whole life, and I remember back during the late 70s and early 80s when, there were dozens of rapes, and they hadn't caught this guy. He ended up ultimately only being convicted of 4 of the rapes. And then all but one of those convictions was then tossed out by the Washington State Supreme Court because a couple of the victims were hypnotized to kind of have memory recall from the rapes. So even though there was DNA evidence and other things that tied Kevin Coe to those attacks, he ended up only being convicted of 1 rape. He had other issues behind bars that increased the length of his prison stay. And then at the end of his prison stay, he was reevaluated and determined that he had a high likelihood of reoffending, that he was still determined to be a sexually violent predator, and they sent him to McNeil Island. And he was there for another 20 years up until they decided he's no longer a danger. He's elderly. He's got some mobility issues, and they said that he could be released, and he was on the 1st of October. And then the ping-ponging between cities began.
Yeah, before we get into that, I understand he was released because he's an older man now. They think he might not reoffend, but correct me if I'm wrong. Coe never admitted guilt to any of these rapes, did he? Or did he participate in treatment?
He did not, and that was a couple of the lawmakers that I've spoken to about this case that have that intend to try and get legislation through during the 2026 session, including Representative Jenny Graham, who from that area, have said, this shouldn't be, if you don't, cop to what you did, ask for remorse or forgiveness, whatever that looks like, and then participate in treatment so that your mindset of being, one of the most violent sexual predators certainly this state has ever known, you shouldn't have the chance to see the light of day outside, being confined. That's the argument, and that's the hope of the legislation they're working on right now. And some of the victims' families, told the Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board ahead of the judge in Spokane deciding he should get out, said, please, he never, admitted that he raped my mother, my sister, whatever. And the torture he's caused our family. And he never participated in treatment, never went to all the required group, things. And while he was behind bars, committed other offenses. So you're right. That's the argument, that he shouldn't have been released. But, the ISRB board decided otherwise. And the judge in Spokane really didn't have any say in it at that point. Basically just had to sign off on it once that decision had been made. And, and then he comes to this side of the mountains.
Yeah. So I think you had reported on this before and said, he was initially supposed to go to Federal Way where he is now. But then that kind of led to a lot of community backlash. He may have gone to Auburn and now he's back to Federal Way. Can you kind of explain what happened there and kind of what the mayors and the elected officials in these cities were saying in response to this?
Yeah. So I, actually live in Federal Way. So I was getting, some members of, city council and the mayor's office kind of tipping me off what was happening before we knew where he was going to end up living, right? Because he has to go and live in, a group home setting. So there's some limited supervision, but remember, he's released unconditionally. So, he can come and go. I mean, he does have some mobility issues, but he can come and go as he pleases should he decide to, go to the grocery store, whatever. But you're right. He was going to come to Federal Way, a group home just off South 288th, not too far off Pack Highway. So kind of the center of Federal Way is where he was going to live. Before he actually came to the city, there was pushback. The mayor's office put out a couple of statements saying, hold up, we weren't notified. We didn't know he's coming. We don't want him here. I spoke to a couple of members of city council who were none too pleased and also, put some things on social media. There was enough pushback at that point where I guess Mr. Coe and the folks that had decided to house him here said, okay, maybe Auburn is a better place for you. And at that point, he moved into, and this is all taking place in the last couple of weeks. At that point, he moved into a group home very near Muckleshoot Casino, kind of on the top of the plateau there in Auburn, and moved into that home. Again, the situation was no notice at that point before he moved in given to the city or local police. They basically find out day of, by the way, here's your new neighbor. And that's all that the state's required to do. And so at that point, Auburn Mayor Nancy Backus issued a statement saying, we're none too pleased about this. And then the Muckleshoot tribe got involved. And because the tribes were not consulted and they have, a number of tribal rights to have a say in this, they pushed back and said, we don't want Kevin Coe on our, reservation land in the city of Auburn. And that led to him again being pushed back to Federal Way, which is what happened this week. And again, my phone started ringing going, hey, by the way, he's back in town. So, different home in Federal Way now in the southwest part of the city.
So the people facilitating this move, they knew that Federal Way was in opposition to it before, from the immense backlash that they received. What was kind of behind the move back to Federal Way? Did they consult the mayor before doing so? Did they say, look, we heard your concerns. This is going to happen anyways?
Yeah, they don't. They just basically, it comes under the jurisdiction of the King County Sheriff's Department. They notified, and I saw a series of emails blasts on Tuesday morning. It was like 5-something in the morning. The King County Sheriff's Office notifies the mayor, Jim Farrell, in Federal Way. By the way, Kevin Coe is moving in. Here's the home. Here's the location in Southwest Federal Way, different than the other proposed option. And then the police are notified within basically about that same time. Police then sent emails out to, back to the city. There was an exchange. Then the whole city council was notified. I was then contacted by one of the city council members saying, here's the deal. He's coming. Here's the home. So I drove there on Tuesday to see if Mr. Coe was in fact there yet. It didn't look like it, as my article indicated. All the windows were open, and you can see a wheelchair accessible ramp going up to the front of the home. And you could even look in the bedroom windows and see like there's a hospice type bed in there, and just a modest kind of dresser and a television. And it said room number 2. And then the next window was room number 1. So you can see it's a group home, set up maybe for people with mobility issues. The neighbors didn't know who their new neighbor is about to be, and they were none too pleased.
Yeah. So what did they say? Did you realize Coe wasn't there, and then you went next door and knocked to see if they had been told? I mean, not to mention the fact that it's within spitting distance of an elementary school. I think you took a picture from the outside just showing how close it was.
Yeah, Brigadoon Elementary is literally just over 200 feet away, would be to the east of where the home is located. It's in a cul-de-sac. And then there's one more street over with another cul-de-sac, and Brigadoon Elementary campus is on the other side of that adjacent cul-de-sac. And we measured off Google Maps. It's like 220 feet, from the home to Brigadoon Elementary campus. So it's right there. But again, as we mentioned, since he's released with no conditions, unconditional release, he can live next to a school, a daycare, a playground. There are no conditions. Now, the community, now that he's moving in, and I think as of Wednesday, he's actually at the home. The community now is notified. Anybody within, I think it's like a quarter-mile radius, receives notice. That doesn't mean that he can't be near the school. And I would think there might be some concerned families there, because even if he's got some mobility issues, he still can use a walker. He still, is ambulatory. So I don't know, if it was my next door neighbor, it would concern me. If I had a child going to that elementary school, it's certainly concerning given, his background. And people can say he's 78 years old now. He's no threat. He's not, wouldn't have a proclivity for, sexual violence now. I don't know. I'm unconvinced, I wouldn't try to convince others to be okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, especially hearing the concerns from the neighbor who has grandchildren that are often at the residence, and said, look, it's a very uncomfortable situation to want to have my grandkids to come here, but knowing that this convicted rapist lives right next door, and then the school is so close, I imagine that a lot of parents are going to come back and say to the district, the city, the mayor, and the facilitators of this move and say, look, why did this happen? Why weren't we told ahead of time? And I get maybe the rules don't require them to be notified, but that's still going to be a concern for a lot of parents. And after the backlash that we saw when he first landed in Federal Way and then in Auburn, I'm really looking to see, will he be moved again? How long will this stay at this group home last, and what impact those parents' feedback will have? But Carlene, appreciate you covering this.
With an ethics investigation, and maybe the book is closed on this whole thing now, TJ. Give us the background, if you will. We're talking about the Office of Attorney General Nick Brown. All right. Private citizen, and your investigative work and what you have uncovered. And then you can catch us up to where we are this week, because this is perhaps one of the most shocking stories I've seen you do since I've been with the Center School.
Yeah. So earlier this year, President Trump issued an executive order canceling federal contracts and revoking the security clearance of a private law firm based in Seattle called Perkins Coie. The Attorney General's office wrote an amicus brief in support of their motion for a temporary restraining order to prevent the canceling of those contracts and revoking their security clearance. What they didn't disclose in the amicus brief is that they had, at the time, 10 active contracts with Perkins Coie. And so a complaint was filed against Brown because he signed the amicus brief with the State Bar Association. And the State Bar Association sent him a letter saying you need to respond to these allegations. And he didn't respond. Apparently his executive assistant was on vacation and didn't see the email for 6 weeks. by the deadline. And then the State Bar Association sent them another letter, Brown, another letter saying, you need to respond. And if you don't, we can suspend your license to practice law as part of our investigation. He still did not respond for almost a month after the deadline. So when he needed to respond, didn't respond for almost a month. He responded via Solicitor General Noah Purcell the day after I reached out to the State Bar Association about this inquiry. And by the way, Noah Purcell used to work at Perkins Coie and was involved with the amicus brief, but he did not sign it. So a couple of days later, the State Bar Association assigned the investigation to a senior disciplinary counsel. And so from there, I got these records back showing that this investigation had occurred this week. And I reached out to the senior disciplinary counsel and asked him about it because I just wanted to say, like, I just want to make sure I understand what's going on right now, and like what the process is and all that stuff. Didn't hear from him. I gave him a phone call, left a message. I reached out to the Attorney General's office. They sent me a statement. Hours later, the disciplinary counsel ended the investigation. And he also ended
the same day you were reaching out asking about it.
He also dismissed a complaint against Noah Purcell that was filed for him defending Brown using public resources because the argument was made that Nick Brown is being investigated as a private attorney. He cannot be legally represented by the Attorney General's office. That's not what they do. And so that occurred literally the same time, like within hours of the dismissal for Brown's investigation. And so I'm kind of baffled. Like, I've never seen this before where they didn't even pretend to like say, hey, we're in the middle of closing this investigation. It's going to be a couple days. We'll get back to you. Right. And on top of that, they did this after the Attorney General's office sent me a statement. Clearly the Attorney General's office didn't know that they were going to be getting this letter from the disciplinary counsel ending the investigation, because they would have just said nothing and they would have just sent me the letter saying, hey, all we have to say is they dismissed it and here's the letter. Have a nice day. Like, that's all they could have said. Right. Incidentally, I also reached out to the governor's office, Ferguson's our former state attorney general.
For AG. Yeah.
Never heard from him. So no idea what phone calls were made. I mean, it's pretty amazing how there was no effort to make this not look like it was rigged.
And from day one, though, the AG's office has said that they still claim though that they didn't do anything wrong, right? And when you got all those records that were redacted, it was under attorney-client privilege, supposedly. I mean,
yeah, they're arguing that Noah Purcell, as the Solicitor General, gets to defend Nick Brown in a state bar complaint investigation that concerns Brown as a private attorney. The State Bar Association has no jurisdiction over him as the Attorney General. They cannot remove him from office. They can't discipline him in his function and role as Attorney General. They can only fine him. They can only penalize him as a private attorney. And so this is where they're claiming that this specific statute that authorizes the AGO to defend state employees applies in this case. And to be fair, it's kind of muddled waters because he's being investigated for what he did as the Attorney General, but in his function and his role as the Attorney General. But at the same time, they are not that's not what they're investigating him as. It's not what he did that they're investigating him on so much as it's what they're investigating him as. They're not investigating the Attorney General. And the other thing that I think is weird is his contact info on the State Bar Association website is his executive assistant at the Attorney General's office. Why is he using a public email as a point of contact with the Bar Association, which concerns him only as a private attorney? He should have his own private email and private residential address. He shouldn't be using public emails for stuff that has nothing to do with his job as Attorney General. So this is where all this weird mixing of the public and private. And yeah, the Attorney General's office has said, like, we've done nothing wrong and we did nothing wrong. And yet every single time you see a conflict of interest in some way, this is a little bit different, but it's not a conflict of interest. It's just, we know they stopped the investigation because I reached out to them. The same way we know they got a response. And also, here's the other thing that's not debatable. Nick Brown did not respond to the bar complaint within the time frame. The fact that his assistant was out on
vacation. There been some kind of a penalty just for that?
Yes.
Shouldn't there have been something?
And then he didn't respond a month after the second letter threatening a suspension of his license to practice law. It's like, so you're not even going to penalize him for that? That's beyond dispute. There is no dispute that he failed to respond to 2 letters by their deadline from the Bar Association, and there was no consequences. If I was a private attorney in this state and I got a letter from the Bar Association saying I need to respond, I would send one of my articles and say, I will respond when media reach out to you about it. The same way our top state prosecutor, the top lawyer in the state, didn't respond to you. I mean, it's baffling how if I was an attorney, I would look at this and say, this is a complete joke. Like, why should I take this seriously?
Yeah. And TJ, his excuse, you referenced it a couple of minutes ago, but his excuse was that his assistant that would have handled that was out on vacation, didn't see it for 6 weeks. Is that what I heard?
Yeah. But let's put that aside for a second. Let's say, okay, fair enough. They still failed to respond to the second letter by the deadline and within a month, and they only responded the day after I reached out to the Bar Association. Now, it's possible they were working on it. It's like, dude, it's a month. Like, this is like turning in your homework a month after it's due, and you're the top lawyer in the state. You're supposed to be setting the example. It's a joke. Like, no lawyer is going to have any respect for the Bar Association. Like, if I was an attorney, I would just laugh if I got a letter from the Bar Association say, what are you going to do? The same thing you did to Nick Brown? You're going to end the you're only going to get a response from me when the media reaches out, and you're going to end the investigation when the media reaches out. You got to be wondering what lawyers and attorneys who are reading the story are saying privately in their law firms. Like, they could have saved face by saying, hey, we're doing an investigation and we are considering penalties, right? Or we're considering something to say we're taking this seriously. Instead, it's dismissed within hours, which makes it clear either, I mean, it's very likely that the letter had already been written and they just were deciding when to send it out, which really begs so many questions. Who made the decision to end the investigation, the day on October 21st is the same day I reached out? Who made that decision and why? And why were they dragging it out? I mean,
they're tired of TJ Martinell from the Center Square constantly inquiring.
This is the other thing that just baffles me from the perspective of Nick Brown. If Nick Brown had hired a private attorney, we would not have access to any of this stuff because State Bar Association investigations are private. They are not subject to public disclosure. By using Solicitor General Noah Purcell, he made it subject to public disclosure, which is how he got these documents. And now we know and have written, Nick Brown is probably the first attorney general in the history of the state of Washington to have a formal investigation launched against him by the Bar Association. He's probably the first attorney general in Washington state history to have his threatened to have his license suspended. I mean, and he's not even 1 year into his term.
Do we have access? Do we have access? Or maybe you already have them, but, we'll request them. I know you're all over all these, materials that are subject to public records requests, but, who made the decision to ultimately close it? Why, like you say, will we be able to get that information?
I mean, on paper, it's the senior disciplinary council's decision, but I mean, I don't accuse me of being a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist to assume that somebody made a phone call and said, end this now. Or maybe he did, and I forced their hand. Who knows what deals were being worked out. And people can say that's right. Cynical. It's, look, guys, I'm sorry. We're not stupid. Like, we're not dumb. This didn't happen just coincidentally happen within hours of me reaching out with questions about this thing. Okay,
so the private citizen that you have worked with, I read your article, I've read all your articles on this, that they basically dismiss him as somebody who's just, got it out for the office and has just wasted taxpayer money because they've had to fight against him. Is it?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the classic part of the Attorney General's office's statement is they talk about the complaint. They did not talk about the fact that the State Bar Association asked Nick Brown for a response, threatened to suspend his license, and then launched a formal investigation. They only talk about the complaint. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like, okay, if it wasn't a big deal, why did the State Bar Association ask for more information? If it wasn't a big deal, why didn't Nick Brown respond in a timely manner? If it wasn't a big deal, why did they launch a formal investigation? Like, clearly somebody thought it was a big deal. And his statement basically just says that it's so funny how the Attorney General's office can just sit there and just trash the credibility of the State Bar Association by implicitly saying that they are investigating something and taking something seriously that is meritless. And then there's no consequences for Brown for ignoring them. I mean, Brown has completely destroyed the credibility of the State Bar Association. It's kind of amazing. Like, ignores them, doesn't respond on time. His communications office is making comments that any logical person would understand undermines the credibility of the Bar Association. And then no consequences. Not only is the complaint dismissed, but there's not even a reprimand for not responding on time. I mean, again, if I was an attorney, I wouldn't take these people seriously.
Well, and now SBA is saying, nothing to see here, folks. We're game over. I mean, is there any anything further that the person who launched this can do?
Yeah,
I mean, anything?
There's 45 days to appeal, and I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot to be said in those in the response, because I mean, everything I just laid out, and then at this point he can just say, really, you couldn't even reprimand him for not responding on time. To be fair, this is not some rookie attorney working at some law firm and is like for his third year out of law school. This is the top state lawyer involved, and there's no consequences. I mean, what message does that send to any attorney anywhere? It says,
that's a really good point.
It's like you get punished, like, if you're the top dog, your account. I mean, the thing that I've learned, because I've been investigating the Attorney General's office for the last, since I started here at the Center Square. If there's anything that the conclusion is, if you are the Attorney General, you are the most powerful person in Washington State because you are accountable, as we know now, to no one. With the governor, you're accountable to the legislature and to all these different organizations that you have to work with to write a budget. The Attorney General's office doesn't answer to anyone because the only organizations that can hold it accountable is the State Ethics Board, and it's run by the Attorney General's office. And the only organization that outside of that could hold the Attorney General accountable is the State Bar Association. And we've just seen you can flagrantly ignore them and not take them seriously, and they're not going to do anything.
Wow. Well, I am so happy that you have stayed on this. I mean, every stage this has gone forward, TJ, has been more shocking. This basically washing their hands of it and walking away after you put pressure on this week is, I guess, not surprising, but it is shocking. It really is. And I hope that people, you say they're,
the thing that it's not so much shocking, but it's just I think what it tells people in Washington State is these people are so secure in their positions, they don't even have to pretend like this stuff isn't going on. They are able to openly just say, by dismissing a complaint hours after, just saying, yes, we can just end things and we don't care. The Attorney General can just completely ignore the State Bar Association and nobody cares. And so it kind of it's what we're doing is we're giving people an accurate view of what stage we're at in Washington State's governance, because when people are haven't fully consolidated power, they have to put on a pretense. But now they're so secure and everybody's enabling each other that we know what state we're in, literally and figuratively. We know what the state of Washington is in at this point.
Well, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. If there's anything that happens in these 40 3 remaining days or whatever since for an appeal period. I know you're going to be watching it. And TJ, thank you so much for staying on top of this story. For readers, for viewers right now that want to hear more about this, read more of TJ's coverage, thecentersquare.com/Washington. For now, this has been another episode of Washington in Focus.